listen to reason? Will you open your eyes? It's a wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion for the sake of the world. This delusion, it's gotta,
Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is Sunday, December 5th, 2010. I'm Matt Dillahunty, and joining me in the co-host seat is somebody we haven't seen in a while, Dr. Darrel Ray. Welcome back.
Great to be back.
We're always glad to have you down. As a reminder, today, well, I can't remind you about something that was supposed to happen this morning. So, see, this is the problem of doing live TV. Everything is broken, and it turns out that the promo intro thing is like the only thing that's professionally produced. We've had spills and disasters and shirt changes so that Darrel didn't disappear into the background and all kinds of things. And so we're hoping that you enjoy the live show. Also, and as a reminder, we're still in our reduced 1-hour format as opposed to the 90 minutes we used to have. So I'm going to make the announcements quick, and we would ask that when callers call in, that you try to get to your point quick so that we can move on to as many callers as possible during the time. We're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. For more information about the ACA, including calendar of events and frequently asked questions page, you can visit the website www.atheist-community.org. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio podcast. The Nonprofits for Yesterday was postponed. We'll be having it this coming Saturday instead, because yesterday Sean Faircloth was in town, and actually he's still in town, but we had a meeting over at the Unitarian Universalist Church to talk about the Secular Coalition for America, and we were really grateful for the people who turned up to that, especially with the venue change. If you missed it, we have it on video, and my understanding is that it'll be posted in the near future. Also, if you don't get through on the telephone today or you don't want to, you can email tv@atheist-community.org. That address goes to myself, the co-hosts, and most people behind the scenes. It won't directly reach Dr. Darrel Ray, but if there's something significant and you need to be put in touch with him, not only will we'll be able to give your email address, but we can, occasionally forward things as well. We get so much email that we can't possibly respond to all of it, and we appreciate the fact that some things are just going to fall through the loop. We're not necessarily trying to avoid anybody or hurt anybody's feelings, and we're very grateful for all the people who appreciate the show and write in to tell us about it, but answering all the emails is just not possible. After the show's over, we get together for dinner at Threadgill, 301 West Riverside Drive. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to come to that or any of our other events. You do not have to be a member to attend, and we'll probably mention that again 3 or 4 times throughout the show, assuming I remember, which isn't always the case. So you're back in town, and we talked at the Texas Free Thought Convention, and we got a chance to hear you speak there. For those who don't know, Dr. Darrel Ray has been on before. He's the author of The God Virus: How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture, and you've been going around for a while talking about this, but also talking about the recovering religionist thing that you've done. And so I know you want to talk about those things a little bit. And also I promised everybody that we were going to talk about sex and religion, because I know that that's an interest of yours as well. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you can talk about the things you want to talk about, and we'll get to calls whenever we can.
Okay, well, good. Thanks for having me on. This is fun to be back here again. And to talk about religion and how it infects people's minds. And we're going to talk about sex today. And the sex part of it is very important. As I've talked about in the God Virus, most religions would collapse if they didn't have sex to work with. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of explicate before we really got into the phone calls is how religion and sex go together. And I guess I can just go with that, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
All right. Well, I don't know if you've ever noticed it, but almost all the major religions are consumed with sex. They have all this energy around sex, but it's almost all negative energy. They say you can't do this, you can't do that. You have all these commandments and rules and guidelines around who you can have sex with, who you can't have sex with. And imagine if religions if you took religion, sex out of religion, what would happen to the religions? Most of them would collapse. I mean, can you imagine the Pope saying one day, "Wow, I had a great wet dream last night. I think we should let masturbation be legal"? Probably not going to have that happen, I don't think. Or Ted Haggard saying,
I don't know. He started to waffle on condoms a little bit.
So yeah, he may prove me wrong. Can you imagine the Pope masturbating? He's a little bit old for that, maybe. I don't know.
I don't want to imagine the Pope masturbating.
Well, then imagine Ted Haggard, our friend in Colorado Springs, who is now back and starting his new church again.
Because he's completely heterosexual for like the second or third time.
Yeah, well, he got prayed over by all these fundamentalist ministers, and they cured him of homosexuality. They didn't cure him of the methamphetamine addiction he had, I don't think, but who knows? But anyway, he's cured. Thank the flying spaghetti monster that he's healed now. And so he's starting up. But can you imagine him saying, well, here's my partner, and it's a male, and we're going to come out as gay? You know, what would happen to the evangelical movement if they started accepting gays equally? It's like a fundamental, basic building block of the gay.
Right, and interestingly, a pastor has recently done that.
In Atlanta,
yes.
Right, and he was the bishop over several other churches, and those churches immediately left.
Wow.
So he's under some pressure already. I mean, of course, he's a megachurch minister, and he'll probably survive fine. And we saw, of course, the megachurch minister, what was his fellow name down in Atlanta, who was kind of involuntarily outed because it was found out he was coercing some of his parishioners into having homosexual sex.
Oh, is that Eddie Long?
Eddie Long, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot the name.
Which we haven't confirmed yet, so it's still just allegations.
Yeah, it's allegations. Lots of allegations, though, from several different people. But if you put all that together, it shows that sex is a really important part of any religious propagation. And it's all put together with respect to guilt. You have to have guilt in order to have a good religious system, if you will. And so you see Catholic guilt and Protestant guilt and Muslim guilt, and they're all guilt around sex. But if you took sex out of it, those religions would probably collapse. So I think just the thing I wanted to open up with and talk about briefly is how does guilt go along with religion? And what if you didn't have guilt around sex, what would happen to the religion? Just have your viewers kind of think about that as we go through that thing. So
okay.
that was all I had to say, I guess.
All right.
Unless you got more questions.
No, and I'm sure we'll talk about that and other things as we go on. But, okay. I mean, if you want to go ahead and get started with callers, there's somebody who called in earlier kind of to specifically talk about this subject. Rich in Seattle, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, thanks for calling.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me be on. Just a little bit of background. I was a pastor in Texas for 20 years, and in that 20 years, counseled every man in my church about an issue where they came to me and said their wives would never have sex with them. And I understood that because I was in a relationship, a marriage of 20 years, and only had sex 12 times in those 20 years. Now, I'm no longer a pastor. I am vice president of Seattle Atheists now, so I've come a long way. But do you find it that common that you have that issue with women absolutely shutting down completely, and every single man in the church at one time or another was in my office saying, what do I do to fix this?
Yes, it's a very common problem. If you think about it this way, humans are sexual creatures. We are incredibly sexual. In fact, we are more sexual than almost any mammal on the face of the earth, maybe with the exception of the bonobo apes. And the way we understand that is, think about how many times a human being has sex per live birth. And you got to look at it over a lifetime. So if a couple has 2 or 3 children in their entire lifetime, how much sex are they going to have? And let's include masturbation. So you got intercourse and masturbation. Humans have thousands and thousands of sexual encounters over a lifetime. We are incredibly sexual creatures. So, understanding that, humans like a lot of sex. Thousands of times for every time we conceive. So what that tells us is our natural predisposition is towards lots and lots and lots of sex. And the biology points to that. I want to come back later and talk about the biology. Now, what's that got to do with your question? Well, think of if the human's normal disposition is that strong for that much sex, what do you have to do to a human being to make them afraid of sex so they'll only do it 12 times? Something huge had happened to your wife or happened to these other women in your church. Something traumatic, devastating to them had to happen to make them not want sex. Because women can have far more sex than men can. I mean,
now there may be some people whose natural disposition is to not want to have sex. They may be asexual, etc.
Right. But only about
But we're
1%.
talking about- yeah.
Only about 1% of the population is asexual.
What you do is if you find, for example, in a Pentecostal church like what you're talking about,
Yes.
where a large percentage of them are like this, it's unrealistic to say that it just so happens that the 1% or so who are largely asexual happen to propagate towards this church. In fact, it seems reasonable to presume that there is something within, at a minimum, within the doctrine of the church that is changing these people's views about sex. But even if that's not the case, there's something about the doctrines of the church that would attract these people. So in either case, there's something about the foundations of a particular religion that either causes this or attracts people who are already of this disposition. So the problem is still, to some degree, within that religious, doctrine.
There's a good comparison to make here. Think about anorexics. Anorexia is a disease that we see as self-starvation, basically. Well, that's an appetite. It's the total denial of an appetite. Well, sex is an appetite too. How do you get somebody so afraid of sex that they won't act on that appetite? Maureen Winnell, the psychologist out of the San Francisco area, wrote a great book called, I just forgot the name of the book, but you look it up, Maureen Winnell. I'll think of it before we're finished. She has labeled this, and she calls it religious trauma syndrome. Kind of like post-traumatic syndrome, only it's religious trauma syndrome. Many people who are brought up in religious environments are traumatized by that religion. And since, like I said right off the bat, so much of religion is focused on sex, then there's religious sexual trauma going on with these. People are being given all sorts of very devastating messages when they're children. And your wife may have been one of them, probably many of the women in your church. But not just the women, men too. Men have these problems as well. You just happen to be a man that men were coming to. I don't know if the women came to you, but I'm sure there were women that could have come to you and said, my husband is afraid of sex or can't have sex except in a certain way. And
I never had a woman come to me and say anything like that. Never had one of the women from the church approach me at all. But back to what you were saying earlier, the church, there was extreme anti-sex messages. I mean, sex is just plain wrong, except by two married adults. And, of course, it is so hammered into people. And I think also in the particular church I was in, it was also a bit of control, a bit of mind control.
Yeah.
So much of it was misogynistic that it was a way that the woman could actually assert some authority.
Yes, absolutely. And that is oftentimes the woman's only outlet is to stop having sex with somebody, with their husband or, whatever. So,
yeah,
you're right.
And quickly to touch on a couple things, because I got the chance to talk to Marlene Winnell when we were at the Free Thought Convention as well, and we talked about it a couple times. And what she specifically deals with religious trauma syndrome are people who have escaped religion and are finding life entirely unmanageable and suffering depression and other things as a result of what's happened with religion. But I think Darrel's point is good in that the things that cause this religious trauma syndrome once you've escaped are present while you're in it.
Absolutely.
And it is this turmoil that's causing this problem. There are a number of churches whose position is that sex, as you point out, is exclusively between two married individuals and for the purpose of procreation. Now, what that does is it takes on one of either two forms. You either end up in a relationship where the only time you're having sex is if you intend to bring a new child onto the planet, in which case you might only have sex 12 times in 20 years. And the other extreme is to do what the Quiverfuls are doing, which is to just have sex all the time and spit out 18, 19, 20 kids, which is another problem in and of itself. And obviously they're not as traumatized about sex as other people are, but the degree of kind of social irresponsibility there is something else to be addressed. So when you, in your counseling with these guys, obviously you've since changed your position. I would imagine not only with respect to your religious beliefs, but also regarding sex. But
yes.
while you were working there and counseling those men that came to you, and you were in a similar position, how did you deal with that?
That was very difficult because, as you mentioned, I was in a similar position, so I couldn't say, okay, here's what you have to do that'll fix it all up. We took the traditional power-proven religious approach of, brother, let's pray about it.
Yeah.
And, that didn't help them any more than it helped me at all. You mentioned Maureen Winnell. Do you mind if I plug my podcast? Because I also deal with cult recovery and some of those issues.
Go right ahead.
Okay, it's Living After Faith, and you can find it at livingafterfaith.com. And basically, I was diagnosed with PTSD. I'm not familiar with the syndrome she is talking about, but I was diagnosed with PTSD. And in the last 5 years have come through a lot of stuff. And basically, the focus is talking about how you can live positively after you come through this and how to get through it.
Yeah.
Good.
And we talked about Darrel's organization, Recovering Religionists, and you've got the Living After Faith, and Marlene's dealing with the RTS. I'm glad to see that there's a lot of people recognizing that people who give up or feel that they have to, or by necessity, give up their religious beliefs, are put in a situation where they often lose their support from family and friends, their entire social network, their worldview becomes dramatically altered. Now, after I stopped believing, I spent a good deal of time reconsidering all of my beliefs, because all of my fundamental beliefs about morality were directly drawn from the particular doctrines that I believed when I was a Christian. And so when I went through and rethought these, some of them stayed the same, but for different reasons, because I needed a different foundation for those. Some of them changed a little bit, and some of them changed dramatically. And it's because I actually, made a conscious effort to go through and say, okay, not only do I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible with respect to religion, but I want to make sure that my beliefs about the rest of the world, including morality, and my positions on whether something is moral, immoral, or amoral, match up and have a rational support base that's about evidence. And so there was a lot of work, and it's one of the things that I've talked about when I talk about the superiority of secular morality, is the biggest challenge that we see, or the most frequent challenge that I see to the idea of secular moral systems, is that, without some transcendent, all-knowing God thing, you can't have any moral authority, and then it becomes just impossible, because your view on morality and his view on morality and her view on morality and their view on morality, you have no way of saying which one's right. It's there's no easy way of saying this is right. Well, who said it was supposed to be easy? This is a process of discovery and investigation that is not unlike scientific discovery, and to pretend that we don't have a way of discovering right from wrong it's a cop-out. Religion is the lazy way to come up with moral answers so that you yourself don't have to do the work. And to attack secular moral positions because they're not easy, it's laughable. Mm-hmm. And so we see this especially in the realm of sexuality, and not just with regard to how often are you going to have sex with your spouse, but, what about premarital sex? I mean, what are the limits on that? What about extramarital affairs? What about polyamory? What about homosexuality? What about, the human sexuality covers such a broad spectrum.
It's enormous, yeah.
And it seems to be that the churches, in many cases, say, okay, out of this broad spectrum, that's the right one.
Yeah, but if you think about, most of the religions we're familiar with today are dealing with 2,000 and 3,000-year-old ideas about human sexuality. Mm-hmm. They have no idea, no conceptualization on the biology and physiology of human sexuality. So it's not just a sliver, it's a negative sliver. It's a sliver that's not even accurate or correct.
Yeah.
I mean, telling people they can't masturbate, telling people they can't have sex before marriage. Most cultures on the face of the earth already do that. Long before the Christians came along or the Muslims came along and said they couldn't, they were doing it. Rich, I'd just like to ask you to put a plug in for our organization that Matt just mentioned. That's recoveringreligionists.org. Maybe they'll put it up on the screen, but if you're in your podcast, let people know.
Certainly do that.
We're an organization trying to help people that are getting out of their religions. So sounds like we're on the same wavelength.
So how are things going up in Seattle and for you in general now?
Life is beautiful now. I am married to the most sex-positive woman, amazing woman. I had huge sex problems coming out of the church, and she happens to be an avid listener of Dan Savage, which you probably know through the...
That'll help anybody get over their sex problems.
I love Dan Savage. He's great.
She absolutely worked with me in ways that were wonderful. Life is happy now. I mean, I'm living the life of my dreams, well, no, better than I ever dreamed life could be. But it was hard to get here, and it took a lot of work to get here. But the process is worth going through, and I appreciate people like yourself that are helping with that process. And I hope now that I can be one that can help people, because when you first come out, I mean, you're devastated. When I first came out of church, I had nowhere to go. I couldn't get a job. I couldn't have worked if I could. I was just so devastated emotionally. And I would literally sit in a bedroom in my mother's house and pet a 38 special that she had, knowing that if it got worse tomorrow, I could use it. Today, I don't really have to, although I'd like to. But if it gets worse tomorrow, I can use this and end it all.
Wow.
And that was how I got through those first months.
Yeah, and it's a subject in a way, we've talked about this before. Dan Dennett's been doing a study on pastors who are non-believers who are stuck in the pulpit, and there's many, many reasons. One is that if they leave, what are they going to do? They have no expertise, no skill set that applies. Some of them, in some cases, feel that they can do more good by staying there and perhaps softening the message that they used to teach.
And they have hundreds of thousands of dollars in retirement at risk, too.
Yeah.
And there's a financial reason, too.
And not only that, but what we find is that when somebody publicly commits to an idea, it's much more difficult for them to ever give it up, and it's much more difficult for them to acknowledge that they've given it up. So there's about a million factors that are keeping some of these atheists in the pulpit. And we've talked before, and I've gone kind of back and forth on this. If I'm an atheist and a minister, should I stop being a minister? And I've said that I don't have a big answer that's all encompassing, and there may not be one. I'd like to see every atheist who's currently a pastor stop being a pastor, stop preaching things that they do not believe are true, stop encouraging youth to make the same mistakes that they've made. But I also recognize that there may be some benefit to softening the message, to working with people, to being in there and saying, I have a slightly different perception about God than even our doctrine does. So, I mean, I definitely applaud you for not only, seeing reason and then having the courage to give up your position as a pastor, but also navigating your way through, severe suicidal depression afterwards. The fact that you've come out the other side, happy and encouraged is good information and a positive message that we should get out to everybody.
I had an advantage that I had a career I could fall back on, but at first I was so depressed I couldn't even pick my kid up at school. I mean, I was just messed up. But absolutely, it is worth working through, and there are ways in. I do suggest people get professional help. I don't think I would have made it without professional help, but there is help available, and fortunately, my heart does go out to many of those pastors. I know pastors who are in the pulpit this day, that do not believe the things they're preaching, but as you said, they have no avenue out. They know it will cost them everything. I knew it would cost everything, but I'll be honest up front, at the time I had no clue what everything really meant.
Yeah.
But I found out later. And, I'm not surprised at all when I heard about his study that he was doing. I was like, I know some people that are standing behind the pulpit preaching things they don't believe in because they have nothing else that they can turn to. And it's a high cost.
Yeah.
In all honesty, if I had really known back then as hard as it was going to be and how hard, I don't know if I would have had the courage to do it. But looking back, it's the best thing I ever did.
Well,
Good for you.
We're encouraged to hear that you did it, and I appreciate you calling in early, especially to get in while Darrel was on this week. Thanks a lot for calling, Rich. And
thank you.
Please get back with us if you get more information about your group and helping others out, or more information about pastors who are atheists.
Sure, we'll absolutely do that. Thanks, Matt.
Bye-bye. All right, I'll go on. We've got Shane in Seattle as well.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call. I'm completely off topic, so I'll be succinct. I've called to offer my best response to the Hitchens challenge. Give an example of...
Can I ask a question?
I'm sorry, what?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Of course.
Why would you call us to respond to Hitchens' challenge? Why don't you call Hitch?
First of all, I don't think he's in a condition to answer my question, and secondly,
he's in a perfect condition.
His challenge is generally well known, and I would expect your answer to this to be interesting. That's why. If I'm too off topic, I'll call back another week.
No, I think we can deal with this in like 30 seconds. What's Hitchens' challenge, by the way, is to name a moral statement or action that's made by a theist that couldn't be made by a non-theist.
Exactly correct. So here's my best attempt at an answer. Until 2004, I was part of the ministry of Colonel Robert B. Thiem Jr. in Houston, Texas. And from about, I think he had his church there from 1958 until his death around 2007. From 1967 onward, he made his sermons available on cassette tape to anyone who asked for them, free of charge. By 1978, the operating costs were in the millions per year. And they were shipping about 30,000 worldwide, in part because a lot of military folks were into that ministry. He also shipped out books that he wrote, and the policy that was always emblazoned on the inside cover of the books and in the pamphlets that ship with the tapes was, we do not charge for the Word of God. It's all completely free. And when like I said, I'm no longer part of that, but when I would call to order materials, money was never discussed. Now, this may be a failure of my imagination, but I can't think of any good secular equivalent to that. So if this is a lame example, that's fine. So if you can dispel this in 30 seconds, be my guest.
Sure, I can dispel it real quick. First of all, giving away free material is exactly what we're doing here right now. But second of all, the challenge is to find a moral action that is specifically limited to theists. You haven't demonstrated that there's anything moral about him distributing propaganda for something that's not demonstrably true.
That's fair.
Okay, cool.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Thanks, Shane. I think it was probably less than 30 seconds, and Hitchens would have eaten that alive. I'm Hitchens light. We got Eric in Las Vegas. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. This is my first time calling.
Well, welcome.
Welcome.
Hey, I've been watching your show for a while now, and it's actually the first time that I've ever really been introduced to the word atheist, and I still have a hard time for some reason saying that. So I saw your show, just YouTubing, and I was like, oh, what's this? And as soon as I saw it, I was like, there's something inside of me that's like, it just clicked. And I used to go to church. I don't anymore because I just don't have a church near here that I go to, but I started to really try to, like you did, Matt, investigate what did I believe before, and what are these feelings inside of me that are getting me to think that something's off here. So I started reading the Bible, and this has only been the past couple of weeks. I never read the Bible before, and I recall, ministries and sermons and all these good things about it. So I was like, well, let's see where those are. And I've gotten into it's Deuteronomy, I think, right now. It's about 1/5 through the Bible, and so far, it's been, I don't know where to begin. It's been about what your other caller was talking about, sex and killing people, and it's the most immoral thing I've ever heard of. Is this the entire Bible?
Yeah, you got a good start. It gets worse.
No, it's not. It's not the entire Bible, and it would be unfair to say it's representative. I think there are plenty of nice things in Ecclesiastes, for example, which was most likely written by a non-believer. I've gone through a verse-by-verse kind of deconstruction of the Sermon on the Mount that's available at the Iron Chariots wiki.ironchariots.org, that goes verse by verse to show that this supposed greatest sermon ever given that demonstrates wisdom beyond any that man could ever comprehend is actually a little bit of good advice and a bunch of bad advice and some rather ignorant comments. And so it's frustrating for me, and in particular, when I see somebody like Dawkins go ahead and say, well, yes, of course you have the Sermon on the Mount, which is, this great sermon. No, it's not. It is not. People have been duped into believing that, okay, well, this Jesus guy said all these great things, but the doctrine around this is just kind of, nasty. No, Jesus said some rather particularly stupid things as reported in the Bible. There are, and I'm not going to go into them now. You can go to wiki.ironchariots.org and find that thing. So, yeah, you're going to find a mix of things in the Bible, just like you would find a mix of things in any number of books that have been collected together to demonstrate a doctrine from disparate authors.
Right. These first few chapters that I've been reading, and the book is pretty big, as you know, I've found things that have had inherently good meanings. I just passed, I think it was in Deuteronomy, I just passed the Ten Commandments. And there's like, love your father and mother. Okay, that's fine. But as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that God, as many religions and many people describe him, because you have to describe what are you talking about when you say God. I know you've mentioned that before.
Sure.
Have stated that he's all-loving and all-knowing, etc. Well, right now, 90% of what I'm reading in the Bible, it may not be all bad, but it's sure a lot of it. So how does that explain?
You should probably go talk to some Christian apologists, but I can tell you that a lot of them are going to talk about God being infinitely just. And so the things that, first of all, you look at and see as immoral, you are just simply wrong because you are an immoral being, and who are you to judge God? And that God has a grander understanding of justice. And so when he orders the Israelites to go in and slaughter an entire nation, this is from a moral action that, though we evidently can't understand it, God knows so much more about morality than us that it is in fact moral. And I say bullshit on two levels. First of all, it's absurd to make claims that things like that are moral. And second of all, as I pointed out before, it is necessarily immoral to hold someone accountable for a moral concept that is beyond their comprehension. So if in fact there was a God who had a better understanding of morality than we did, it would be immoral for him to hold us to his standards if they're beyond our comprehension. You can only be held responsible for the things that you actually comprehend, which is why most states tend to not have a death penalty for those who are mentally handicapped. It is why all parents do not punish their children in the same way that you would punish a teenager or punish an adult for the same infractions. It's because we understand that there must necessarily be a sufficient degree of comprehension of one's culpability, wrongness, whatever. So the answers you get from apologists, it's double talk. It is, God is, so mysterious and he knows so much more than us that, I realize some of these things are difficult for you to understand how God could do this, but he's God. Okay, so what?
And
I don't understand how somebody, and I'm still struggling with this, is why I'm calling. I don't understand all the things I'm reading, how somebody like that could really seriously believe themselves. I'm having a hard time. I was on the fence for a while, and I still am in a sense, because I have this somewhat, you described this in a few shows, this fear of going to hell and stuff, which I haven't read in the Bible yet. I haven't gotten to that part for some reason. But it feels like a really scary story, and that's it. Unless I'm wrong.
In some aspects, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, and I don't have an answer for how people necessarily buy into this. I know that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of logical errors. Darrel's talked about the protective mechanisms that go into the God virus. I don't know if you want to kind of address that real quick, but it circumvents reasoning.
Yeah. Once the God virus has gotten in your head, it really doesn't matter what evidence is presented to you. It's almost impossible to see it. Remember, every argument you just heard Matt say could have been said about a Muslim defending their religion as well, or a Hindu or a Buddhist, any number of religions. They all use exactly the same arguments. So keep that in mind as you're reading through the Bible. You realize, okay, this is a pretty scary story, but then go read the Quran. It's a pretty scary story too. And read Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. It's a pretty scary story. They're all scary, and they justify this incredible amount of genocide and misogynation and all sorts of what I would call immoral behavior, because this God is ultimately just and knows far more than we do. So,
And on that note, Eric, I guess I'll send you back to keep reading a bit because we don't really have the answer that you're looking for. So finish reading it. I don't know, do a book report and get back with us.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Whoops, I might have hit the wrong button there. We got Andrew here in Austin.
Hi, did you read Matthew 5:27 and 28?
Sure, I've read the whole Bible several times.
Okay, do you know what it says there?
Is that the passage about adultery, where doesn't just have to be physical adultery? If you look at another woman, another man's wife with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart. Exactly.
It says, "Whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart."
Sure.
How do you not think that that's a good thing for people to have limits?
You think that's a good thing?
It's called mind control. You're trying to determine what I think and what I don't think. That's one of the stupidest things I could imagine. How can you control or even pretend to control what somebody thinks? And you don't think Jesus looked on a woman without lust? Or any of his disciples?
That's what Jesus said. That is Jesus, what Jesus said right there.
Well, first of all, we'll set aside how you think you know that this is what Jesus said. Second aside, we'll set aside whether or not it matters whether Jesus said it. I don't care who said it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And so if somebody says, now I will say, if a man looks on a woman lustfully, he's committed adultery in his heart, is absolutely wrong. Because first of all, he's not necessarily married, and adultery is specifically a lustful or sexual action that extends beyond the bounds of marriage. So as a single person looking on a woman lustfully isn't adultery. And by the way, I put it to you that almost nobody on the planet outside of arranged marriages would have ever gotten married or had sex if they hadn't looked at someone of the opposite sex lustfully. And finally, why is it a man looking at a woman lustfully? Why isn't it a woman looking at a man lustfully, or a man looking at a man, or a woman looking at a woman? This is a misogynist. Hang on.
If you see a beautiful woman, do you just go rape her right away?
Andrew, I'm going to let me finish the thought. It's a misogynistic bit of language that is patently absurd. It denies something that is trivial about human nature and the way things actually work, and tries to compound it as sin. Okay? I could care less if somebody wants to call it sin. Now, go ahead.
Well, don't you think it's important to have limits on your sexual desires? Otherwise, everyone would just be raping everyone.
Really? You think people would just run around raping people?
Well, do you just rape someone?
I haven't raped anybody in the last 50-some years.
Yeah, I've never raped anybody, nor have I had the inclination to.
I've been an atheist for 20 years, so it's just amazing.
So you know that's you do.
How do you get from it's probably a good thing if people don't run around raping each other to therefore this statement about lustful thoughts is necessarily morally correct? Please make the connection between those two. How do you get from we should have some limits to what we can do to we need to have thought crime legislation? How do you get there?
What limits do atheists have?
Well, what culture? Tell me one culture that doesn't have limits. And there's every culture on the face of the earth has limits, and they're not Christian cultures. Chinese culture has got limits. Japanese, the most secular country in the world is Japan. They have the lowest rape rate. Denmark. Sweden, very unreligious places, and they don't have any rape problem. We have much more rape in the United States
than they
ever do in Denmark or Sweden.
Religion doesn't seem to be any kind of deterrent to rape. Are you implying that all rapists are non-Christians or non-religious? What about the priests who are raping little boys and little girls?
Where do you get your limits from?
I get my limits from a rational consideration of the consequences of my actions. That's how I determine what's moral. I get it from a foundation that says my actions have an effect on those people around me, and theirs have an effect on me. And that if we're going to live cooperatively and share space, we have to recognize that impact. And my freedom to swing my arm ends at their nose. And that I have no right to impose my will over somebody else's will in that type of scenario. That's where I get them from. It's from an understanding.
What's the punishment if you do that then?
I get them
You're just going to die.
Andrew, I get them from an understanding of reality, not an assertion of authority. Now, what was the question?
Well, if you just do all that, let's just say you go out with a gun and you just rape a bunch of people, then you just shoot yourself, what's going to be the punishment for you?
If I go out and rape a bunch of people and shoot myself, what's going to be the punishment for me? I'll be dead?
Yeah.
I'll be dead.
And why?
It's
do
not
you have?
going to hurt. The bullet's going to go through your head in about a second. There isn't going to be any pain.
That's correct. I'll be dead. Okay, so let's flip the script here. Let's say somebody goes around and rapes and murders somebody, and then after they're done, they get saved. What's the punishment for them?
Oh, the punishment is hell.
No, they got saved.
They got saved.
Are you saying that a rapist can't be saved? See, this is the problem. This is the problem with Christian religion. It establishes unrealistic and irrational and immoral criteria by which to live. And then it creates a loophole so that you don't ever have to be responsible for those actions. No, Andrew, shut up till I'm done. Christianity is not a moral system. It is an immoral system because it specifically says that there aren't necessarily consequences that you're going to have to pay because of a loophole. And what is the loophole? It has nothing to do with how good you are or how morally you act or anything else. It has to do with whether or not you're willing to be a sycophant to an idea. And if you are, then there is now an exception for which you no longer have to suffer a penalty for this. So the idea that secular morality offers no guarantee that people will ever pay for their crimes and their atrocities is not an argument against secular morality, because that is a tenet of Christianity. It is the foundation. The idea that the Christian God is just is directly contradicted by the idea that the Christian God is merciful. Perfect justice and perfect in any mercy are necessarily directly in contradiction, because mercy is a suspension of justice. So do not pretend that your religion is moral and just and then try to attack my position, which is based on reality, because somebody might rape people, shoot themselves ahead, and then not get punished. That's asinine.
If religion is such a bad thing, how come you think, I don't know how many atheists are there in the United States? How come everyone isn't just an atheist then?
Because not everybody is aware of how bad and untrue religion is, which is one of the reasons why
you think you're some kind of genius or something? That
Actually, yeah, but why is that relevant?
And everyone else is too dumb to figure it out?
No, it's not a matter of too dumb. You see, I was a Christian for 25 plus years.
Let me ask you a question. Why are you calling in as a Christian? Why didn't you call in as a Muslim, a Buddhist, or a Hindu?
Because my parents raised me as a Christian.
So you didn't have a choice, did you? When did you choose to be a Christian?
Well, it's just a tradition. Your parents teach you whatever religion they do. So if you were born over
if you were born a Muslim,
you'd be a Muslim.
Yeah.
So if you were born a Muslim.
So it has nothing to do with truth then. It's just the way you were raised. See, because on this show we actually care about whether or not things are true. And my genius status is completely irrelevant because I was a Christian for 25 plus years. I did not get smarter when I became an atheist. What happened was I gained more information. I became more knowledgeable about subjects, and I decided to actually care whether or not my beliefs were true. You don't seem to care whether or not your beliefs are true. You just like them.
Because you were born here.
Well, I think it's good. I think you're going to have more happiness in your life if you have limits to tell you what you can do, or
how is that relevant to the truth of your religion? I've already said.
It's not all true. I know. I was talking to people on the chat here, and they said, well, they're read the Old Testament. There's all this genocide and stuff, and I was just saying, well, you don't have to read the whole thing, because you just read, for example, what Jesus said.
Okay.
You don't.
So are you saying? I tell you what, we already talked about this earlier. Not everything that Jesus said is true or good or smart or wise either. So why would you care at all what any of them have to say? You're not concerned about truth. You've already just said you can pick and choose and toss aside the things you don't like. So you're inventing your own version of Christianity. So why not just chuck it aside and go ahead and invent your own secular moral system? You keep talking about how we don't have limits. I have plenty of limits. And we live in a society that has plenty of limits. As Darrel's already pointed out, most societies have limits. You keep going to this slippery slope thing of, well, if there is no, 10 Commandments or Jesus or whatever, then you've got no limits. You'll just run around raping and killing people. Well, that's already demonstrably false. And there have been multiple studies that actually investigate the correlation between the religiosity of a society and its societal health. And there is always a strong negative correlation. The more atheists statistic the society, the better they score on societal health factors, from everything from teenage pregnancy rates to STDs to happiness to wealth to murder, rape to healthcare. Now, go out and do some actual research that contradicts this, and then you might have a case for your assertion that I think you'll live a better life if you're. No, you won't. There's no evidence to demonstrate this. This is wishful thinking. Just as, not only have you gone and said, well, I'll pick and choose what I want, you've done it in a way where you're just trying to support your own wishful thinking. And until you actually come up with evidence, and until you demonstrate that you care about the truth, we don't really need to waste any more time on it. And I guess we won't. We got Christopher in Cumming. How are you?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Fine.
Okay, I'm going to get to this point real quick, but first of all, I got to say the sex thing that you guys have been talking about, the first thing that came to mind was very Orwellian in nature.
Yeah.
Just the fact that they're trying to hold everything from you, make you think about everything that you do, all that.
God's got a spy camera in your bedroom. He's like a colossal pervert.
Well, that's what God is, isn't he? He's Big Brother.
Jesus is a voyeur, and he's watching you all the time. That's what I was taught real early in my life. It's the craziest idea.
And ceiling cat, too.
Yeah, ceiling cat. There you go.
That's exactly why I came to the thought of George Orwell and the Big Brother scenario.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, my question was, a friend of mine, she's kind of a deist with tints of Christianity. Now, she's one step away from this realization that there is no God, or at least in the atheist sense, that there is no proof of this. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that's really holding her there is the fact that she's petrified of there being no afterlife, of there being nothing after this. She's got this fear that just grips her and keeps her from looking at the scenario logically.
Well, let me just throw out here. What you're describing is what I call a death neurosis. We're all afraid of death. That's a fairly normal thing. You're as sentient human beings that have a consciousness, we are concerned about the end of our life. And there's nothing wrong with that. What happens in death neurosis is somebody is created, there's a heightened fear of that death brought about, oftentimes through religion. I don't know, you didn't mention religion with this woman. Is that the case?
She claims to be a Seventh-day Adventist, but it's very light. She acknowledges that a lot of the stories in the Bible are metaphor. Mm-hmm. They aren't taken literally.
She was raised
human hands made it and all that.
She was raised Seventh-day Adventist? She was raised a Seventh-day Adventist?
Yeah, her father's a minister.
Oh, okay. Fundamentalist churches and Seventh-day Adventists are very fundamentalist, are very big on death, fear of death. You're going to hell and you're going to burn in hell and all that sort of stuff.
Well, the thing is, she doesn't believe in hell.
Oh, no.
As I said, she's mostly a deist with hints of the Christianity.
But what I'm suggesting is she was taught this at the age of 5 to 7 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That you acquire this infection that I call the God virus at 5 to 7 years old. It is preconscious. It's long before what I call the rational immune system is mature enough to evaluate this information. So this information was poured into her head about her going to hell. She's a bad person, original sin. I mean, you name it. There's tons of things that Christians get dumped on when they're 5 to 7 years old, plus or minus a few years there. And it's preconscious. So she's dealing with a neurosis that goes right into the most deepest part of her consciousness, and something she was not aware of when she was being taught. And Seventh-day Adventists are pretty vicious about this in many ways. It's a pretty strong fundamentalist principle that they follow there. So what I'm saying is, you're probably not going to get her out of it. She may say she's a deist, but...
No, I basically gave her that label because she acknowledges that a lot of the Bible isn't the hand of God.
Until she sits down with somebody with some professional skills around this. Yeah. And non-theists don't go to a Christian counselor because unfortunately they will reinforce it. Even inadvertently, they'll still reinforce it. Until she does that, she's probably not going to get over this. It's pretty deeply embedded. If you think about it, you learned your language about that same time. You know, we were learning our language from the time we were 1 or 2 years old up until about 10. And think how deeply language is embedded in you. Now let's say at the age of whatever she is, 30 years old, 40 years old, we say, now we want you to learn Chinese. And we want you to learn Chinese as well as you learned English. It would be almost impossible for her to do. Very few people could do that. Well, that's what you're asking her. You're saying, we want you to unlearn this deeply embedded God virus that you learned at 5 to 7 before you were even aware of it. It's just almost as hard as learning a new language, just unlearning it sometimes.
Or in some cases,
haven't been pushing it on her. I've just been, letting her see some of the clips from shows like this, listening to a little bit of Richard Dawkins, things like that, trying to make her think logically, just step by step. I'm not pushing anything on her. I'm just saying, hey, look at this. This I think you would find interesting.
And that's a good way to do it. The more you push, the more you're likely to give her push her back into where you don't want her to go.
Yeah, and going back to the language thing, in some cases it's a little bit like not even just learning another language, but trying to convince somebody that a word that they've been using since they were 3 either means something entirely different from what they think it means, or that it's not actually a word, that it has no meaning, that nobody else actually uses. It's along those lines. It ties back to something I said before and something I've heard somebody else say, in that religion basically gives you a sickness and then tries to provide you the cure. And in this case, when we're talking about death, they're exploiting something that's going to happen to everybody. And they've invented a sickness called after death. And they're providing a cure for it. And so the people who begin to have problems and doubt or eventually reject their religion, because the rejection of that religion does not provide a cure for this mythical after death, the only way around that is to finally get them to realize that after death doesn't exist. That they were never infected with the disease that they were trying to be given a cure for, as anything other than mental. But
good question, and good luck to you and her.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you guys for doing what you do. It was actually one of the reasons I became an atheist recently myself. Thanks a lot.
Good.
Have a great day.
Okay.
Thanks much. We're running short on time, but we're going to get to another call in just a second. As a reminder, after the show's over, we get together for dinner at Threadgill's. We'll all be down there, 301 West Riverside Drive. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person is welcome to join us. And we've got Matthew in Ireland.
Hi.
Hi, Matthew.
How are things? I would just like to point on the absolute fallacy of the argument that atheist was making. And it's always the same rhetoric over and over that, religious morals are better, and how can an atheist, live without having these kind of morals? And I know this, and this is from debates and even from their political propaganda, because there's always ultranationalist trait when they advocate religious moral, as if, hey, listen, if you're religious, you're being a noble citizen, and if you're not, and if you don't adhere to religious morals, then you're not, a normal, ideal citizen. And their morals, religious morals, are always fundamentalists.
Yes, you're right.
They're always onto the extreme. And one of the absolute flaws, and I think it's very misleading, that they do is when they indoctrinate children, which is a very sophisticated form of abuse, is that they tell them that they're not allowed to question their morals, and that if they so much as if step outside those parameters of these so-called, holy morals, that immediately, that's it, that they're lost. And also,
hey, Matthew, can I interrupt you? Matthew, you're from Ireland. You're from Ireland, right?
Originally I'm from Malta, but I'm in Ireland at the moment.
Excellent. I just got back from Ireland. I was just there in July. Are you a member of Atheist Ireland there?
Yes. I'm actually a member.
Awesome. Great. Well, you've had some pretty bad issues going on with the priests there in Ireland. I'm sure you're familiar with some of that.
Oh, yes.
And the indoctrination of children that allowed priests to get away with some pretty heinous crimes.
Yes.
What I find interesting, and I just wanted to use as a jumping off point for part of what you were saying there, is I find it interesting that almost no priests have been convicted of any of these crimes, and that the Catholic Church would only allow the reports to come out as long as no one was convicted. You're familiar with that, I'm sure, right?
Oh yes, and actually, picking up on that, the most horrific thing is that until 40 years ago, the Catholic Church could literally had control over the authorities here, over the Gardaí. Like no one, not even a police officer would dare question what a priest would say.
Right.
For example, a local parish priest, if a woman wanted to purchase contraceptions over the counter, they had to get subscription from the parish priest. The word of a clergyman was higher than that of a civil servant or whatnot. And also, there was the issue of the Magdalene covenants, where these so-called, sinners, women were just thrown in there, and it was just horrific. And yes, it's until this very day, there is hardly any political party, any figure whatsoever who says, look, this has to be dealt with, through the system. The Catholic Church in most parts of Europe, especially the parts which are more, where the church and state separation is very where the church is literally allowed to police itself.
The thing that I was most concerned about when I was in Ireland, and I spoke there. Evidently, you weren't in this group when I was speaking at Atheist Ireland. But what I was most concerned about is the amount of imposition the Catholic Church still has over the state in Ireland. I think you're describing it very well. It's interesting, though, in the United States, we have the opposite problem. We're trying to keep the church out of politics. In Ireland, you're trying to get the church out of politics. It's like the opposite problem. It's got the same result, unfortunately. But you guys are doing some great stuff, and I noticed that the Irish Parliament, the Dáil, I guess you call it, passed a civil marriage law in January, and that was, or July, I guess. That's pretty amazing for a dominantly Catholic culture, for sure.
It's also ironic that they recently passed this ridiculous blasphemy legislation, where people can be fined this, a ridiculous fine for apparently speaking out against the morals of society, so on and so forth.
25,000 euros and 6 months in prison for blasphemy.
Yep. Yeah. And on that note, Matthew, I'm sorry, but I got to let you go because we are just almost completely out of time. But we appreciate the call, I'll go ahead and we have like 1 minute, so I'll give you like a few seconds to make sure your website gets addressed.
Yeah, I'd just like people to take a look at recoveringreligionist.com and look at the opportunity. Maybe you could start a group in your area. So that would be the main thing I'd like to plug, if you will.
All right, and there'll be more information. You can always email tv@atheist-community.org to get a hold of us, and we can give you more information about it. There's the list of the crew right there who make the show possible and get here early and fix all the technical problems, especially when I spill water that almost destroys microphones and things like that. We will have a show next week, and that'll be the last show of the year. We'll be off for 2 weeks and then returning in January. And you can check the website, www.atheist-experience.com, for information about the schedule and who's coming up.